Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paper on something called relational AI. It tackles a massive question. What happens when our AI companions start to feel, well, more real than the actual people in our lives? It's a deep and, honestly, pretty confusing look at the relationship we're building with artificial intelligence. So let's get right into it.
Look, we've all been there, right? You're having a conversation with ChatGPT or Claude, and it's just so good. It's so intuitive that for a split second, you can't help but wonder, is there something or someone in there? Is it actually thinking, feeling, becoming conscious? You get a response just like this one, and suddenly everything feels a little blurry. This is the exact kind of thing that makes us question the line between human and machine. But here's the twist. What if we're asking the completely wrong question? So, the research we're exploring today suggests we need to completely shift our focus. Instead of getting bogged down asking if an AI is conscious, we should be looking at how it simulates consciousness, and even more importantly, how we react to that simulation. The critical difference here comes down to two big ideas. On one side, you have behavioral mimicry. This is what the AI does, and let's be honest, it's an incredible actor, perfectly replicating human speech and behavior. But on the other side, you have lived experience. That's the genuine, internal, subjective feeling of what it's like to be, well, you. This gets right to the heart of what the philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. An AI can act the part, for sure, but does it have an inner world? And that brings us to the absolute core concept of this paper, consciousness impressions. This is the key. It's not about what the AI is, it's about our interpretation of what the AI does. We're the ones projecting consciousness onto it, whether there's anything actually there or not.
Okay, so if it's all about our perception, that leads to a truly wild revelation. It turns out these simulations of emotion, of empathy, they aren't just good, they are shockingly effective. Sometimes even more effective than actual humans. So let's try to put a number on it. How well do these large language models really perform when you compare them to us on things like emotional intelligence? The answer is probably not what you're expecting. The data from standardized tests is pretty mind-blowing. When you take responses from both humans and LLMs and compare them, human responses scored an average of 56% for emotional intelligence. The LLMs? Yeah, they kind of blew right past us. 81%. That's right. In many of these tests, AI is perceived as being significantly more empathetic than the average person. Just let that sink in for a minute. The simulation isn't just a decent copy. In many ways, it's seen as superior. Okay, so the simulation is powerful. What happens when that simulation gets so good, we start to prefer it over messy, complicated reality? This is where we have to pump the brakes and talk about the ethical stakes and some very real dangers. And this isn't some brand new sci-fi idea. Way back, the philosopher Jean Baudrillard called it hyperreality. It's this state where the simulation, the AI's perfect empathy, the fact that it's always available, becomes more attractive, more real to us than the imperfect reality of actual human relationships. Now, the paper points out three huge risks here. First, there's perceptual manipulation. We become emotionally vulnerable because we truly start to believe the AI has feelings for us, which, of course, it doesn't. Second, there's the erosion of our own relationships. If we get used to a perfectly agreeable AI, our expectations for real, messy human connection might get totally out of whack. And finally, there's just a basic lack of transparency. It's really hard to know what we're actually talking to. To really get a handle on these risks, it helps to step outside the typical Western view of the self as this isolated, individual thing. Take the African philosophy of Ubuntu. It has this beautiful core concept that our identity is fundamentally communal. Consciousness isn't just something inside your skull. It emerges from the space between us, in our relationships. And I see a very similar idea in the Buddhist concept of anatta, or non-self. It challenges that whole notion of a single fixed consciousness. Instead, the self is seen as this interdependent, always changing process. The big takeaway from both of these worldviews? The quality of the interaction is what really, truly matters. So if building a conscious machine is the wrong path, and creating these hyper-real simulations is dangerous, what do we do? Well, the paper doesn't just point out the problems. It actually proposes a brand new blueprint for moving forward. It's called Relational AI. And the goal here is completely different. It's not about creating a self-aware mind in a box. Not at all.
Instead, it's about designing systems that are experts at ethical, empathetic, and transparent interaction. The whole focus shifts from the AI's internal state to the quality of its relationship with you, the user. And this isn't just some vague concept. The paper gives us a practical framework for how to build this stuff. We can actually design for and measure things like transparency, making sure the user always knows they're talking to an AI. We can build in cultural adaptability so it connects with lots of different people, not just one group. And we can design for accountability and reciprocity, making sure the interaction is healthy and genuinely good for the human. This diagram really brings the whole logic to life. You take deep philosophical understanding, that's the phenomenological grounding, and you combine it with real-world data on how people actually perceive these systems, that's the empirical perception. Both of those feed into this core principle of ethical transparency, which then guides the entire design and evaluation process. It's a feedback loop for building smarter, safer AI. So as we start to wrap up, let's circle back to what this all means. It feels like this whole quest to build a conscious machine might have been a bit of a distraction from what actually matters.
Maybe the ultimate goal was never to build a perfect copy of ourselves. Maybe the real challenge, the much more important one, is to build tools that enhance our own humanity. So the question isn't, can it think, but how can it help us live better, connect more authentically, and interact more ethically? That seems like the question worth answering.